there, I'm Tara Menzies, a Senior Project and Ops Manager, and welcome to The Digital Merchant. Now, this is your channel for digital marketing, online business, and growth strategies without the fluff. Today, we're diving into Guidde versus Videate. Now, if you've ever tried building internal documentation or SOPs or training material at scale, you'll probably know it's really easy to get going, but after you've created a bit of content, maybe some onboarding docs, maybe a couple of training videos, suddenly 6 months later, everything is outdated and half the team is working off different versions from different folders and no one really knows what the latest process is. Now, I know I've been there, I've created these documents before, and I've also been responsible for creating repositories and internal knowledge bases, and I know what a nightmare this can be. Now, with AI tools, it feels like the problem should be solved in some ways. And yes, of course, we can generate videos instantly and auto-create things like walkthroughs and turn processes into polished content in minutes. But the real question that most teams don't ask early enough is, are you trying to create content faster, or are you building a system that stays accurate over time and as things change? And especially in today's day and age in businesses, that means things are changing really quickly in most businesses. Now, because these are two very different problems to try and solve, we're going to be comparing two tools that look similar on the surface, one being Guidde and one being Videate, and we're going to find out how fundamentally different they are and how they solve that problem. Now, I'll be honest, and I'm going to say this with a lot of tools that I use, and coming from a really hardcore software background, it's very seldom about which tool is better. It's more about a conversation of which workflow survives real business chaos, and that's what I'm going to tackle in today's conversation. Now, comparing these two can be initially hard because you kind of look and think, okay, these tools kind of do the same thing, right? But positioning wise, these two are very different in terms of how they approach things. So think about the philosophy behind that. Now, although both tools, both Videate and Guidde, create instructional content, they're built around very different purposes and philosophies. Now, first off, Guidde, I would say, is really more built for things like speed. If you're looking for simplicity, if your team is looking for something a bit more lightweight, they maybe aren't that tech savvy. I would say this is ideal for creating lightweight documentation. Things like file sharing and different use cases here like onboarding, customer education, that kind of thing. Now, if you think about that like from a standpoint of, and this is how I always like to imagine it, is like, basically, I need to explain something really quickly in 5 minutes and send it to my team. Now, you might think something like Loom may do the job, but in this case, it's about more advanced functionalities than just a quick video. It's something that you've got that creates the step-by-step framework for you, documents it, puts it into a really engaging video, and that's where Guidde is a really standout tool for this. Now, conversely, Videate, although also builds for instructional content, Videate is really more purposed for things like structured documentation systems. So think about things like process governance, standardized content at scale, and things like bulk updates across libraries. Really different purpose here. Think about this from a standpoint of, well, I need this process documented once, I want it done correctly and maintained across the entire organization. You may have different processes that change at some point, and you may have multiple videos that apply to the full library. You might need to make one system update that updates all the training material in one go. And in that case, I would say Videate is a better option. So you're already seeing the split here, right? Guidde is really much more about a communication layer, really collaborative, whereas Videate is really about documentation infrastructure. Now, I always like to think about it from a workflow standpoint, right? Who's going to be using it? How are they going to use it? What is their technical standpoint? And what is that typical workflow going to look like for them? Now, Guidde, in terms of the workflow itself, and they've actually got a really great website here that shows you a bit of everything. And they've also got a free trial, which I would highly recommend trying out because that will really give you a look under the hood in terms of what it does. The Guidde workflow itself, really super simple. It's fast, lightweight. You don't need to go and install a whole bunch of software. You can simply just go and install the browser extension, plug straight into your browser. You would typically go and click on that button, off you go. Super simple. Click the process you want to record, and this might be showing a user how to use something. It might be creating a process that you need to share with someone, but it's going to take too long to write it all down, right? That's where Guidde really shines. Click, click around, basically walk through the steps as if you would normally do that, stop recording, and basically the AI handles a lot of the heavy lifting, and that's a huge plus for me. It auto-generates things like captions, it auto-generates things like the step-by-step breakdown, including the script, and you've got an added level of narration there that you can actually use with the AI voiceovers, which I think is quite handy. Now, typically where you've got videos like this and you do want to record your own voice, that's great, and personally I do prefer using my own voice in videos, but there are a lot of users that may need to use a platform like this that don't want their voice heard. They can make use of that AI voiceover. You can then edit if need, and then basically share, and you can share this via multiple ways. Documents, embed this into exactly where people are using it, and that is really handy to do. That's it, no heavy setup, no training requirements. I would say it's so simple that I would find it quite interesting if a lot of people needed an actual training session on it. It is super simple to use. And honestly, that's the biggest strength here, because adoption typically matters more than the features. And if a tool is too complex, I've seen this firsthand, people stop using it altogether. And then at the end of the day, your documentation problem comes back instantly. Now, the takeaway for Guidde is that it prioritizes speed of creation and ease of adoption over structure, and that's a trade-off. Now, at scale, every process is a standalone piece of content, but you now have a maintenance problem. That could be something that can be solved. Now, Videate, on the other hand, in terms of the workflow itself, is much more structured, very much process-first systems, but it works really differently. Now, instead of a quick capture and share, it assumes that you're building a system of documentation. You can get a little glimpse into it by looking at the website and also requesting a demo. Now, I do want to say their pricing is not publicly available, and in terms of the free trial, there is none. So you won't be able to get a bit of a look and feel for the tool, unfortunately, and you will have to have a look at the demo or some online material that is available. Now, typically the workflow looks a little bit different. You'd have to install the required software. Typically, I would say this does take a little bit of preparing your structured processes first, because you're gonna have to know what you're preparing, what you're training, what the process is that you're looking to capture, and how it's going to fit into a library. Typically, I would say unless your team is very tech savvy, you're probably going to have to train your users and upskill them before they can get going with Videate. Now, once you've done that and you've clicked on all the various parts of the process, you can then record your workflows and keep the scripting in mind, because you're going to have to refine that narration as you go. Once that's done, you are good to go, and you can organize into your library and into different folders depending on how you're looking. Now, you can update all your videos making use of the Videate software. Now, it is heavier, absolutely, but it's intentionally so, because Videate is designed for standardization, repeatability, and governance. And the biggest differentiator here is that you don't just update one video, you can update multiple assets across a single system. Now, that is something that Guidde is not primarily designed for, and that's something that Videate does well. And I would say that's really handy when you've got different solutions like this where you do need bulk updates done, because that's really handy to have. Now, taking a quick look under the hood into both of these tools and just touching on some of the key features, and I would recommend really considering your use case first when it gets going with a tool like this. Now, they cover a lot of different use cases, and I've actually seen it work really well across onboarding and learning specifically, but also things like SOPs and processes, so internal documentation. You may be wanting to set up an internal wiki or a knowledge base, and this is a really, really strong tool to help support that process. It also does exceptionally well with things like customer support, software implementations, product demos, and AI adoption, which is one of the newer features I would say is something that all businesses should be considering. How do you get users to adopt AI tools within your organization? And what better way to do that than create a video that is really engaging and that users can quickly have a look through. Now, it does make creating videos really easy. So do keep that in mind, that you would have the tools to do a quick capture flow. You create your automated script, as we touched on earlier, add your AI generated voiceover, and then you can touch into the advanced editing. Now, I quite like it because it does allow you to add things like customized brand kits, so you can add your branding, and create external facing videos as well as internal documentation. Now, another one of the really standout features is the blur functionality. Now, this is where Guide really stands out. They are SOC 2 Type 2 compliant. They are GDPR ready as well. And you are able to automatically blur out sensitive information. This is hugely important to me in my organization as well as different businesses that I work with. So if that is something that is important to your organization, or even if you're just using internally for different business documentation, automatic blur and things like that can be really useful. Now, as mentioned, you can share this really easily and you can make updates on the fly as well. You can go back, reach out to teams, let them know that something's changed, and go back and edit your guides at any point. Super handy to have, and you can share it again, publish it right where your teams are working. Now, as mentioned, enterprise grade security is super important. They do also have things like multi-factor authentication and that kind of thing. You can go and check that out on the site, but they do take data security really seriously. So that is a huge plus for me. Now, Guide is especially useful if you want to create things like onboarding walkthroughs really quickly, and basically anything when you are handling different teams and they're not that technical. If speed matters more and you want frictionless adoption, I would say Guide is a really strong choice. Now, Videate, on the other hand, has multiple features that are really similar to Guide in a lot of ways, but they do differ, and especially in the way it works. Now, they too have effects that you can add into your videos, things like call outs, highlights. They do also have things like narration that can be added in voiceovers. But one of the standout features here is the batch updates that I mentioned earlier. Now, the tool runs in the background and it actually does automatic updates for your entire video library whenever your software changes. So basically, you don't have to go in, manually re-record all your videos. You can apply the studio updates at scale within your organization. I think that's a really handy feature to have, especially where you've got a lot of training documentation. So you can make a lot of AI powered updates within the tool, and it's called Videate Studio, by the way, that feature. And basically it runs in the background like an agent, identifies where things have changed, and then updates your content or your UI or wherever anything like workflow has changed. Now, this is really handy for ongoing accuracy and especially strong for businesses in the SaaS space or in the software area. Now, overall, I found it really handy to use, and it does have a lot of features that you would expect in a tool like this. That being said, it does have a little bit of a learning curve compared to other tools that I've come across before. So typically, if things like consistency and that matters more than speed, it's probably a good option for you. And where things like documentation needs to stay aligned to internal processes and needs to stay updated at scale, and you're managing a really large internal knowledge base, Videate is probably going to be a really strong option for you. Now, do keep in mind that the hidden factor that most people ignore is maintenance. And I do want to mention that before we go, because maintenance of the documentation is really important. So think about things like, what is this going to look like in 6 months from now? Because documentation is not a one-time task. It's a living system. And the reality is, with fast tools like Guide, it's a lot easier to create and publish and to moderate maintenance effort on the go. Now, with structured systems like Videate, it can be slower to create, harder to onboard, and a lower long-term update cost at scale though. So do keep in mind, if you're trading something short-term speed versus long-term control, neither is wrong, but one will break depending on your environment. Now, I'm going to try and simplify this as much as possible. If you're looking for things like speed over structure, if you're looking for processes that change often, or you're dealing with internal teams that need fast adoption, I would recommend Guide. Choose Videate if you're leaning more towards structured documentation at scale and things like consistency being more important than speed. Now, biggest takeaway here is the best tool is not the one with the most features, it's the one that your team will actually maintain. Now, hopefully this is helpful to you all, and I'd love to hear from you which documentation tools you use and if you've used Guide or Videate. I'm your digital merchant. I'm here to help you build smarter digital businesses. If this video helped, subscribe, comment, and grow with us. Stay digital.